Right, we're on, I think, about chapter 22, or theme 22, on themes of paradise. And I try to start the session always with something that is a means to paradise. So the Prophet ﷺ relates in a rigorously authentic hadith related by Ibn Hibban and Al-Hakim, that he says, guarantee for me 6 things from your very selves, and I will guarantee you the garden. He says, number 1, whenever you speak, be honest, yeah. To be truthful, to be genuine, to be honest. That's number 1. Number 2, if you give a pledge, a promise, if you make a promise, then keep it. Number 3, if you're given a trust, then return it back. Number 4, preserve and protect your chastity. Number 5, lower your gaze. And number 6, hold back your hands from harming other people. So he says these 6 things, if you can practice them in your life, you will be, the Prophet ﷺ will guarantee you paradise. What's interesting here, how many are of the tongue? So 1, if you speak, then be truthful. If you carry out a promise, that's of the tongue. So that's 2 of the tongue. Then he says if you're given a trust, return it. So I suppose that's with the hands, isn't it? And then guard your chastity, that's your privates. Lower your gaze, your eyes, and then hold back from harming others. Okay, so that's 2 with the hands, 1 with the privates, 1 with the eyes, and 2 with the tongue. Now the theme we're going to cover today is about the conversations and the gatherings in paradise. When we are in paradise, inshallah, that's what we hope, is that how will we converse with one another, and how will our gatherings be? As we know, the Prophet ﷺ described places, the gatherings of remembrance as like meadows of paradise, didn't he? And so, what will be the reflection of this? This is a reflection of what will be in the next life. So how would they be? The first thing we look at is the verse. There's many verses talking about this. The first one is in Surah Tur, verses 25 to 8, where Allah says, وَأَقَبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْدٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. And he said a group of people, they come together, heading towards one another, asking one another, قَالُوا إِنَّا كُنَّا قَبْلُ فِي أَهْلِنَا مُشْفِقِينَ. We used to be, before all of this, amongst our family, fearful. So we used to have, and mushfiq, in the typical Pakistani name actually, isn't it? Mushfiq. What sort of mushfiq comes from shafaqa. Another common name we know is shafiq, isn't it? Shafiq's quite common, which means it's got this blend between compassion and fear. So it's like that's the nuance of this fear. It's like a fear out of compassion. And it's interesting that they say amongst their families. So it's maybe Allah knows best, that it's talking about they had compassion for their family but also fear for them. And so because if you have that, you wish you to tend to them and you advise them. Because if you truly have, this is something so often lacking in some families, there's this nus, like actually speaking, conversing one another about, sharing stuff like how's it going, what you're doing. And if you're really worried about someone, say you've got a child, you say, you know what, there's something there, I'm a bit worried about them. And so obviously you're not going to, some people, how do they react? They just say, let's just forget about it and hopefully it will just go away. Does that usually work? No. What do? You say we're going to have to address this. So you speak to them and so forth. So this is a sense of fear for them. I've got a bee flying around. Ali, I think that's your one. So mushfiq is about having fear but also concern and compassion. Does that make sense? So that was a state of the people in this life. They're amongst their family. They had shafaqa and fear. And because of that, what does he say? So they're having a conversation in paradise with one another about this. When we were back in the dunya. So this shows that the people of paradise, they have conversations about the dunya, about this world. We will remember the dunya. It won't be as if we go into another world and then, what was that like, that last life? Was there another life? No. We will remember it. فَمَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا, and then Allah will bless us. So and because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us. Because we had that state. So if you have that state, that's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَوَقَانَا عَذَابَ السَّمُومِ, and because of that, He protected us. He put a barrier between us and the chastisement, the painful experience of the samum. And we always need to ask when we read the Quran why Allah uses certain words over others. And so samum's an interesting word. We have it in Surah Waqi'ah, fi samumin wa hamim, don't we? So samum means a poisonous wind that penetrates the skin. And so they specifically focused on that. And that's going to be interesting for something I touch upon in this talk today about wind. Okay, so the wind of the Hellfire is like a poisonous, like like a gas that penetrates the skin of the people of the Hellfire. And that's specifically what they mentioned, what Allah, because they could have just said anything, couldn't they? They could say Allah protected us from the Hellfire. Allah protected us from the blaze. But specifically they mention that. And whenever that happens, we need to ask, why does Allah specifically mention that? Inna kunna min qabalu nad'uh. From this, from before. So here's another quality of them, the people who gain paradise. They used to call on Him. So that's another important quality of people of paradise. No matter who you are, no matter how lousy you think you are, the fact that you call on Allah and you're conscious of Allah, that's a state of the people of paradise. So you're always, oh Allah, Ya Allah. Every time you're mentioning Him and returning back to Him. Why? Innahu, because He verily, huwal bar, and He is the Ar-Rahim. Again in the Quran, whenever you see Allah's two names, you need to ask, why has He mentioned these in this specific context? Al-Bar means all-encompassing good. And so obviously they're in the paradise and they're witnessing all this encompassing good. And they think, when you imagine if someone showers loads of blessings upon you, after a while it gets a bit embarrassing, doesn't it? You think, oh my God, what do we say? I don't? So then He says, Barrul Rahim. Because compassion doesn't mean you deserve it. Yeah. So when your mother does all this for you, you say, Mum, I don't deserve all of this. And you say, you're my putter. Okay? It doesn't matter, that's it. Okay? Even if you're a bad boy, I'm still going to make you, what is it? What's that thing you make in Ramadan in the early hours of the morning? Huh? The prati. I'm still going to make you one. Yeah. So this is the quality of the people of the paradise. So we know from this, first of all, that the people will meet one another and converse with one another. Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Hijjah, وَنَزَعْنَا, and we, Allah, when He uses the we always ask why. It means ultimate power. It means He's done something that you couldn't even expect possible. What has He done? He's removed from our وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ, and He removed, naza'a means to wrench out, like pull out basically, from their hearts, min ghillin, from ghil. And usually ghil is rancor, is translated as like hatred. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. Ghil is where I come up to you and some people you just say hi and you're trying to be nice, but inside you're like, I don't like this guy. You know that feeling? You can't control that. You come up to some people and you say, there's something a bit weird about him, I don't like him. And that's ghil. So in paradise, whenever we see someone, we don't get any of that. But can you control that in this life? No. And so that's why it says you said, because you could still be my brother, I could still love you, but I could still feel like something. I still got feelings towards him. I can't shake it. So that's ghil. And so Allah's saying, no, but in this life you can't necessarily get rid of that. But in the paradise it doesn't even happen, because every time you look at someone's face in paradise, you feel an affinity towards them. You feel like they're you, and their faces are so fair that when you look at them, you're reflected back. So of course you don't get any ghil. Yeah. There's no sort of adversity at all, because you're saying he's a good-looking guy. That. So then he says what? على سرر متقابلين. They will be on couches, these huge couches. In some narrations they go like whoa back, like these Turkish or the Saudi sort of the stretch like that. They go on, and we're sitting on them, and we're just looking at one another. And they say they move around like this. So when you want to look at someone, it just goes like this, and you're right in front of them, and you're gazing upon them. So what are we doing? So we're facing upon them and we feel only affinity towards them. It says Tabarani relates in a weak hadith that the ones in the higher station will visit those of the lower station, but not vice versa. It's a weak hadith, but basically and in some ways that's a blessing, because the lower people are honoured by the higher people. Okay, they don't have to put themselves out, but the higher people, they have compassion for the lower people, and so they come down for them in order to, and they're going to bring better gifts than the one from below, aren't they? And so they come down, and he says, visit them on lower stations, unless, he says, except if they loved one another for the sake of Allah. He says, if they love one another for the sake of Allah, they were mutahabbina fillah, then they will get to go wherever they please with and to visit them, because that love bypasses everything. How will they visit one another? We said some narrations say their couches basically say, I'd like to go to Atik's house, so it goes woo, his couch basically goes zooming off, okay, and that will I visit him. In other narrations there's camels and there's horses that will ride. In a hadith of Haritha, it's a famous hadith, it's related in Bazaar, it's a weak tradition, but the Prophet ﷺ came up to Haritha and he says, how are you this morning? And he said, this morning I've woken up as a mu'min haqqan. Are you familiar with this hadith? He says, I have firm belief this morning. He says, Haritha. That's a bit of a claim, isn't it? So he says, every truth must have a proof. So he says, what is it? And he says, on that day, he said, it's as if I see the people of paradise visiting one another, and I'm gazing upon the throne of Allah, and then I see the people of Hellfire being tormented. And he says, basically, he says, go like that. And he says, how is it like this? He says, the other reason is, my state is that at night I don't sleep, and I just feel like I want to be spend my night with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conversation. It's a blessing. And he says, in the day I don't feel like eating, so I fast my days. He says, this is it. And the Prophet ﷺ said, basically, keep firm upon that hadithah, you're on something there. Now, so we know that we visit one another in our homes, but also once a week we visit one another in a marketplace. And when they say it's a marketplace, what they mean by that is a gathering place. It doesn't mean we're buying and selling. In one weak narration, it says that on that marketplace, there's this hadith related in Bukhari, if my memory serves me correct, but there's a weaker narration that adds to it that says that they won't buy trade, they will buy forms. So they will look there, and their form will appear of a beautiful person. It says, I like that one. And basically, you take it on as an even more beautiful form. And it says, those people will gather in the marketplace, and they will visit every Friday. The question that's raised here is that, well, how do we demarcate days in paradise? Because there's no sun, and there's no day, and there's no night. And so we mentioned this previously, is some say at the end of the day the angels basically come and lower the drapes of the houses, so we know that it's the night setting. Others say no, the light from beneath the throne just fades a tiny bit, so that we're aware that that's actually the end of the day. So there are demarcations, and this is important because in paradise it's perpetual. Yes, it goes on forever, but it's constantly changing paradise. Okay, and that's the distinction between Allah being everlasting, because He doesn't change. He always was, always is, and always will be the same. It's perpetual like that. As for we, yes, we can live forever, but it'll be changing. And he says, so we will go, but every Friday we'll meet at this place. Obviously, why Friday? Because it's the most blessed day, which is today. A northerly wind will blow. Why a northerly wind? The Arabs used to attribute the north to coming from Sham, the wind, to be carrying rain, and so it carried blessings. But another thing is, obviously, in paradise, up north, we're talking is a symbol of the throne as well. And so all blessings are coming from the throne of Allah. And it says it blows across their faces and across their clothes, and it increases them in finery and beauty. And then they go back to their families, and they will say, by God, their families will say to them, by God, you look even more beautiful and finer than you were before. And they say, the same's happened to you as well, basically. So every week that happens, we just get fairer and fairer and fairer. What will be their so these are the two meeting places. Now what's interesting here, we meet one another in our homes, but that's more of a private affair, isn't it, still, because you're meeting people specifically. But Allah always says, no, at one time of the week we have to gather all together in like a gathered place, a plain. So that's all in paradise, that reflects that. There's this different type of meeting. There's meeting where we meet one another in our homes, which is encouraged, but generally that's only going to be people who are close and personal to us. But as well, all the people of paradise, one of the blessings that we all meet together at least once a week to be with one another. In terms of the conversation, what will there be? He says, لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما in Surah Waqi'ah إلا Salaman, salama. They won't hear in it any false talk that's not of benefit. He says, and nothing that leads to sin, because obviously you can talk about something that's of not benefit, but it's not sin. So there's two types. There's something that's got no benefit in it whatsoever, and there's something that leads to sin. He says even leads to sin. So it's not sin in itself, but it could lead to sin. And so you're never going to hear something from someone who's going to hurt your feelings. No one can hurt your feelings. No one's going to start doing banter with you in paradise and start winding you up and pulling your leg. It's all lovely, lovely talk. Except salaman, salaman, peace. Now, salam doesn't necessarily just mean peace. It means wholesome talk. Wholesome talk, one after the other. Jabir ibn Abdullah relates in a hadith of Muslim. He says, in paradise, we will make tasbih and takbir and tahmeed of Allah like we breathe. So, are you aware of your breath most of the time? No, it's just going away in the background, isn't it? He says that will be like the dhikr. And some of the scholars said, hang on, dhikr, it's like taklif, it's a responsibility. But there's no responsibility in paradise. We don't pray in paradise because everything's worship. You can't, because what is worship? Worship is something that takes you closer to Allah. You look in paradise, everything's reminding you of Allah and His Messenger. And so it's all worshipping from that perspective. He says, but the one thing we will do, we'll be doing tasbih and takbir of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like our breaths. Our breathing will be dhikr in paradise. And so, like I was saying, there'll be talk of we will talk about the blessings of paradise. I'll come to your house and say, woof, you never guess what Allah bestowed upon me this week. He says, you think that's good, well, you should see what happened to me. And so it's a bit of back and forth, and everyone just marveling at the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon them. And then also the matters of the world. So we said, how did we get here in the first place? And then we reflect back in that, because that's even greater than the worship, the thing that led to the worship, if you think about it. Because what got us in the end? So this is an element of paradise. Sheikh al-Alawi radiallahu anhu was asked, he said when he was in a dhikr gathering, he says, is this better what we're in now or paradise? And they went, oh, paradise, of course. He says, no, this is better. Why? Because this is what gets us there. And so we're in paradise. That's the thing. The problem with paradise sometimes is people become a bit, bleak about life and just, I'm just waiting to die. The Uncle G's at the end of life, like they go off on Umrah every year and come back miserable, don't they? Why? No, God. I know one uncle, he's got diabetes and he's like knocking back iron brew and like drinking everything. He's just trying to die, and guess what? Everyone else is dying around him, but he's not. So it's like, and so that's not the idea. The idea is that every moment is a sense of paradise, and so we just need to be aware of those blessings. And so in paradise, we actually become aware of those states that we're in that life, and think, subhanallah, I wouldn't have replaced those for anything. Another thing it's interesting as well, is that another conversation the people of paradise will have is about the people of hell. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَادَى أَصْحَابَ الْجَنَّةِ أَصْحَابَ النَّارِ. The people of paradise, portals will be opened, and people of paradise will be able to look down on the people of hellfire, and they say, أن قد وجدنا أن ما قد وجدنا حقا ما وعدنا ربنا حقا فهل وجدتم ما وعد ربكم حقا. He says, what our Lord promised us is the truth. Is what your Lord promised you the truth? Okay, so this is a consolation, because people might wonder, is there a hell and so forth? Was that even there in the first place? And those people that abused me, that treated me so badly, will they get their comeuppance? And so as consolation for that, it's basically they open these portals to see those people in those miserable states, and in order to remind them of what they missed, what they actually protected themselves from. So that's even a greater blessing and realization in itself, that we've got this, but also we're protected from that. And in that way, the true believer, he sees hellfire as a blessing, because it's a means to protect himself against those things. And even in this life, we witness that. I.e., when we see someone in like, for example, that's really suffering in their life, you think, what do? It imbues you with, it makes you feel compassion for those people, but at the same time it makes you feel grateful for what you have. You say, subhanallah, I haven't got that affliction. You know, we might whinge and say, oh, my life's so rubbish and I've got this problem, that problem, and then someone walks along, no arms and no legs, and then you say, all right, then it ain't that bad. You know, and that's basically, in paradise, that's one of the consolations. And so we've got 3 reflections on speech. We've got dhikr of Allah, pondering upon Allah's blessings, and then pondering upon how we got these blessings, what led to those blessings, 3, and then 4, protection from, and consolation that the people who do abuse others and victimize others do get their comeuppance. And so that's a relief that these things. And this shows us what fruitful conversation is. And I always mention this. I say about how it's so hard to get fruitful conversation in this day and age, that we have to put effort in just to be human. So exercise was a norm in the past. Just to get by every day, you had to exert yourself, didn't you, physically? Now we have to go to a gym. Some people every day, they go to the gym every day. They literally have to go into a room and do all these crazy things. Why? Just to be normal. That's not belittling that, because it is needed. That's number 1. Then what do? Then we count our steps every day, don't we? Like if people of the past saw that, they thought, why this guy's counting his steps? He might as well do dhikr. What's wrong with him? But it's needed, because we're so out of whack with our humanity that we have to be conscious of our humanity. Before, people would offer food, or we would buy our food from the marketplace. Did we have to think whether it was organic? Did we have to think whether it's healthy? It was the norm. Now we have to put extra caution around food, just to make sure, and we have to spend more money in order to make sure our food is normal. That's another one. And someone complains about, so often when people come into therapy with me, they say, my God, thank God I'm having a useful conversation with someone. Now you have to pay someone to have a decent conversation. Because all their conversations around people, they say they're so superficial. And he says, now we have to pay one another, pay someone, so I can actually feel connected to another human being and have a conversation. And so the point is here, we have to put extra effort and actually pay more just to be human. But in paradise, it's manifest about what reality is. We're looking at one another and we don't want to take one another's gaze off one another. While in this life, you look at someone, after a while you feel a bit awkward, don't you? And you look away, which is normal. And then conversation. Sometimes it's awkward. In paradise, it just flows, the blessings of our conversation. And then just to think about and to focus on what are blessings in our life. That's a struggle in this life sometimes. But in paradise, it just flows all these blessings, and we spend eternity just contemplating upon them. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us that. Subhanakallah.